All right. A warm welcome at Academia Libera Mentis today on this cold winter morning. We're going to have a very special debate for you today. It's, I would say, it's one of the classical debates you can have. It is about climate change. And the question is whether climate change is actually a problem. So we have two special guests here. We have our own Robert Frijters. He will be arguing for that climate change is not a problem. And then we have Lars. Lars is visiting the castle this weekend, and he will be arguing that climate change actually is a problem. I want to first give you both some time to speak and lay out your argument. Then I will ask direct questions to kind of lead the discussion. So Lars, you can start.
Well, human-made climate change is obviously a problem for a number of reasons. Firstly, because we don't know what is going to exactly happen. We know somewhat what is going to happen, like we know that CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions are heating up the planet, and this is changing weather patterns. This is changing the ocean also by acidification and heating, and well, it's causing a number of deleterious effects that are already being noticed, like melting of ice caps, like changing of weather patterns, causing extreme droughts, extreme heat waves, and putting more energy into the system, actually trapping more energy into the Earth's atmosphere system, which causes, all these things. And we know that it is causing it, and we know that it's damaging, and that is why I believe it's a problem, and we need to address this, try to fix this for the sake of our grandchildren, and everyone who comes after us, human or non-human.
Yeah, so thank you. You're suggesting that the problems are that bad that we would need to do something about it.
Yes.
Yes, all right. And then Robert, your first opportunity to speak.
Oh, thank you, Johan. Well, I disagree with Lars. Not that human-made climate change is a thing, and not even that, as he so rightly puts it, we're causing change in weather patterns. We're indeed adding energy to the system, or adding CO2 to the Earth system. And this I do not dispute. What I do dispute is that this is a bad thing. The basis of my argument is that there used to be a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere. If we're talking, in the order of millions of years ago, there used to be far more CO2 in the atmosphere than there is now. At some point, thousands of parts per million. Recently, it's been a bit less. About 15 million years ago is the last time we had similar levels. But what happened to all this CO2 that used to be in the atmosphere? Well, it was changed into life, because carbon is one of the basic building blocks of life. So what's happening with all these CO2 emissions is we're emitting large amounts of gas that's useful to make life with, one of the basic building blocks of it. And we're adding heat energy in the form of heat into the system, allowing for more creation of life. So, well, sure, it's getting warmer, and this has changed. This will cause changes in weather patterns. It also means more life on Earth, and life will last longer on Earth due to all these CO2 emissions.
Yes.
The problem with that is that we don't exactly know how it's all going to turn out. Like, whether it's going to be positive, there are certainly some positive effects, like plant growth goes faster with more CO2. But on the other hand, it's also the speed of the change that is causing the problems, because nature takes time to adapt to new circumstances, and is thriving best usually in circumstances that are stable, that are predictable, and today's world is anything but. Last year and the year before that were the first years that in recorded history that we had more than 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming compared to pre-industrial times. And the oceans are hotter than ever. And
No, not than ever.
Then
Recent history.
Than in recent history. But what we did was we ended a period of relative stability that allowed human society to actually develop to what it is by our own hands, by emitting these gases, and we are now putting ourselves in a position where we are facing an uncertain future, where we do not know whether we can do agriculture in the places we can, the way we can, whether we can still live in some places sustainably in the future. And this is just a huge gamble, and we're taking everything that lives in the world into this gamble. And
Yes, so if I understand you correctly, you both agree that CO2 is the main driver of climate change, CO2 emissions.
and a few other gases.
And a few other gases. Would you agree with that, Robert?
Well, look, the main driver, that's hard to say, that's probably a minor effect that affects temperature, but it's the one that humans are influencing, and it's the variable one. So I'd say it's the main driver for current heating. Sure.
The main driver that is human inflicted.
Yeah, that's the main change.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and from that on, if we agree that CO2 would be the thing we could change, the changes we are making, I'm wondering, Lars, what changes can we make that have an impact that actually is positive?
Well, it's too late to turn around the clock completely, but what we can do is mitigate the effects. The most straightforward way is just to reduce our carbon emissions, and there are many steps that are being taken. It's a very hard thing to do, it's a long journey, but we are doing stuff like putting out renewables at increasingly faster rates so that we don't need carbon emissions for electricity production. Stuff like electric cars, stuff like perhaps electric planes, solar panels that are getting cheaper and cheaper. But that is what we have now. But we are also doing research on like new technologies, like new types of nuclear fusion. That's still far away, but.
So you say it's for us important that we look for alternative ways of using energy to solve this problem with mainly technology.
Well, actually, the new technologies should outcompete the technologies that emit these carbon gases. So solar should be more affordable and better to use than coal, for instance, or gas. And so these new technologies, if developed properly, ought to outcompete the outside of the market.
Just to dive into that a bit more, in the meantime, we don't know how long these technologies will take to develop. Maybe we find some very efficient ways of getting new energy.
It's going really fast, actually.
So you have quite a bit of hope if we put our energy on this.
Well, actually, as recently as a decade ago, it wasn't really seen as feasible to do this energy transition the way we're doing today, and
still not.
Well, it's getting there. It's much better now than it was a decade ago, and I'm confident that it will get better, more efficient in years to come.
Okay. How do you look at these developments? Are there any technological ways, in your view, that we can improve the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and if we do, does it have an effect that we would like?
Well, yes. I mean, the easiest way to improve the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere is, of course, to burn a bunch of fossil gases, because that'll increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, ergo the climate will warm up a bit. Which makes, as Lars so rightly put, makes plants grow faster, and it's significantly faster, something like on the order of like 40% faster than 100 years ago. And will there be changes? Well, parts of the globe that are currently habitable and very fertile become less fertile, sure, but other sections of the earth will become far more fertile yet. Sort of the warming up of the climate is making it so that most of Siberia will soon be fertile farming grounds. The huge swathe of land you open up.
I'm afraid it will rather be a tinderbox than for fertile farmland. I mean, the problem with that is the speed in which it changes, and the places where the most humans are living.
Yeah, I think the question we need to explore is when CO2 levels rise significantly, as you are putting, aren't you taking a big over risk? Isn't this one big scientific experiment that you're making, which you don't know the answers of?
No, but we do know the answers. Yeah, because sort of for most of the planet's history, we've had far more CO2 in the atmosphere than we currently do. It's only, like, in terms of the planet's lifetime, it's only very, very recently that we've had lower CO2 levels in the atmosphere than we currently do, even after all the massive amounts of CO2 we've pumped into it.
Okay, if we take this long time span into account, I think you agree that levels have been higher. Do you think this is something that we can calculate? Okay, if the CO2 levels will rise to this point, the world will look like this, and is it still inhabitable?
We know a lot about the climate. We don't know enough about what exactly is going to happen. There are a number of things that are tipping points. That's when a system like changes all of a sudden, and they are very hard to change back if at all possible.
And it's a chain reaction at some point.
We know of several dozen tipping points and potential tipping points that, if altered, can disrupt weather patterns significantly, make places in the world less inhabitable. Actually, also some of the places that we might think are becoming better places to live might actually again be worse to live due to other stuff, or actually Western Europe might be colder if the Gulf Stream collapses and all that. And because it's all happening pretty fast, and because the thing that's causing it is not being addressed to an extent that it's slowing down, and we cannot move tons of people over actually less than a lifetime because it's changing so fast. It is causing a lot of damage. A lot of people will die. A lot of land will become over.
What I want to ask you, you can address the point first. Yeah.
Because his main contention doesn't seem to be that it's a problem if it gets warmer.
It is a problem.
No. Allow me to make your argument as I see it. It's not necessarily a problem that it's getting warmer, or that there's more CO2 in the atmosphere. His issue more seems to be the time scale. So he seems to think that in a very short period of time, everything will change cataclysmically. Whereas if it was a slow progression over, say, 1,000 years, I don't think Lars actually see any problem.
And people could adapt to it.
People could adapt.
It would still not be great, but it will be more manageable because of the time scale. And because nature actually also takes time to adapt this way. It will be a more natural, gradual transition into the new world.
I mean, historically, there have been many very abrupt changes to sort of nature.
And a lot of them have been cataclysmic.
Sure. The Holocene has already been cataclysmic, so we're already in a time of very quick change, and we have been for the past 70,000 years. We've had very.
I think what we want to avoid is that these cataclysmic things will result in the extinction of our species. And my question to you, Lars, is so what bugs me is that we have all these models and predictions, but at the end, what we see up to now is that there is no real threat currently, and we expected threats a few decades ago. So all these models haven't come true.
There is a real threat. I mean,
Yeah, you think there's a current threat that we saw like 3 decades ago that we warned about, and now we have the problem. So
what they initially said was, of course, the worst case scenario, but it's still a pretty bad scenario, and we still see like random floods happening, or like long-term droughts in places where there used to be not common at all. We see ice caps melting faster and faster, sea ice retreating more and more. We see these things, and when extrapolated, it will lead us into, in my opinion, a nightmarish world.
May I respond
Yes.
to that? Because, I mean, he seems to be making the typical mistake that a lot of scientists do in taking recent trends and sort of draw a straight line so that they will continue ad infinitum at the exact same pace. Where we
So it's actually unpredictability that is also problematic.
I mean, these models that you were talking about the predictions, and as Johan so rightly put, none of them have come true. Sort of, I remember in my lifetime that they were saying that Kilimanjaro would have no ice by 2012 and that Florida would be underwater 10 years ago. Sort of, these were the very real climate predictions when I was young. Mm-hmm. Sort of a few decades earlier, they were warning about an ice age. And so sort of, and I've worked with people who made these models, who were actively involved in making climate models. And, well, they're very simplified because they have to be a model. Sort of, they picked something like 6 to 9 parameters is how they were taught to do this. And so every point, every parameter they put in is hugely overrepresented in terms of its importance. Ergo, their predictions fluctuate wildly, and so
but the models are getting better and better.
How do we know they are getting better?
Because we have more and more data and reality to test them against, and the computers are also getting better at it.
Yes.
And some things that happen that were unexpected.
Like some things I am afraid of, that we have a very selective bias with these models. Do you think that could be the case?
Maybe, with some. But there are plenty of things that we do know, and plenty of things that we've seen happen, not just in models, just in real life, that should be big warning signs, you know.
Such as?
Well, you know, like just a few months ago in Spain, there were huge floods that killed hundreds of people, and this used to like never happen there, almost never.
I don't know, but an infrequent event, and it's infrequent even still, but there have been floods and hurricanes, like disasters are sort of a natural course of life. I mean, we can look back through recorded history and sort of, you see horrible earthquakes in places that don't have earthquakes often. You see
How can we definitively say that with all these events taking place, that we are not having one huge bias of looking at these extreme weather events? They will.
Well, you know, the frequency of these events is probably changing. We know that these events occur quite consistently more often than they did in the past before global warming. We can throw statistics on them, and you can see that the probability of these things happening due to just natural changes is very, very low. Vanishingly small. So it's clearly caused by these emissions and all, and the knock-on effects of these emissions.
Well, look, I don't even necessarily dispute that. I think the severity of the change is massively overstated, but if you throw more energy into a system, which we've done, it's now a bit warmer, so there's also more life. That also means, sure, the hurricanes will be bigger, and sort of you would expect natural disasters to be slightly larger. But I prefer to zoom out and look at the big picture where, okay, disasters are slightly more frequent, but there's also more life, more people living, everything's getting more fertile.
That's what you're saying. where people are living, but that's not because of climate change. That's because of people reproducing.
Precisely. So just because we're emitting all of this,
it's not because the climate is getting better. It's just that we got better in making children survive.
What I would like to explore as a last point of view, like we have all these energy and resources that we are putting in now as society to make sure that we mitigate the effects of climate change or we reduce our CO2 emissions. And sometimes I have the feeling that for a very little reduction in CO2 emissions, we're using a huge amount of capital and energy to accomplish that. Are there any other ways that we maybe can use this capital that better prepares us against any extreme weather events and stuff? Would that be a suitable alternative instead of trying to force this energy change that sometimes lowers our quality of life?
I think we don't really have an option about whether to do it or not. If we don't do it, if we continue on this course, then the planet will heat more and more disasters will happen. And thing is, we do need to invest in these clean technologies because we're literally headed for disaster. I mean, that's my view.
Okay, thank you. You have a closing.
Well, on his idea of cleaner technologies, I find it laughable that he mentions sort of solar energy as a cleaner form of energy because
it is carbon neutral. It's not particularly.
It's not even really carbon neutral, and sort of as a viable solution long term, it is infeasible because there are not enough it's my time to speak. Because there aren't enough batteries for any of it to work long term. We don't have the amount of rare earth minerals required to actually make the batteries that would mean we could use solar power to power our combine harvesters, which are needed to keep our populations as large as they are now. Sort of without the use of fossil fuels, we can't do that. So if you're then looking at if we're using his argument for, okay, we need to reduce CO2 emissions in the long term, well, then we're looking at technologies like nuclear power, fusion power, if we achieve that. And then the question would be, what would be the fastest way to achieve that? And that would probably be to not handicap our own industrial capacity, our own research capacity by pouring it all into technologies that are infeasible in the long term anyway, are quite clearly destructive to at least local habitats in terms of the mining required and in terms of the waste materials produced at the end of their life cycles. I'd say don't focus on that, burn and sort of make sure our economies are working efficiently so that we can best put resources into the production and development of technologies that could actually save the climate if you're agreed with him at all. Which
so you would say it's better to look for the best technologies that we have that produce the most energy and make us the most wealthy in the long term.
Yes, because I feel there's
one last chance for you to react.
The other.
Yeah.
I don't think these two things should exclude the other. We can invest in solar and wind, while also investing in new types of nuclear technology that might exist in the future, but it doesn't yet. I also am not against nuclear energy. I also think that nuclear plants are probably a pretty good fit for low carbon energy production at the moment. Nuclear fusion might be in the later part of the century or whenever it comes. But the thing is, if we just continue doing what we've been doing, then we're heading towards an uncertain future, and we're already in the middle of a mass extinction. Lots of species are becoming extinct, and climate change is a huge part of that because of habitat change and all that. And that's going to cost us also in the future.
Thank you, Lars. And thank you, Robert. I see you're still fired about the subject, and that is a good thing. This is certainly a topic that we need to keep talking about. What kind of technologies should we be looking for? Do we actually need to be looking for any changes at all? But for now, this is the time. So thank you very much for the nice discussion, and see you again next time here in Hodbomont.